Barakata Yahweh, Barakata Yahweh Shai, Barakata Yahweh, Barakata Yahweh Shai, Barakata Yahweh, Ba'ashem Yahweh Shai, Ba'ashem Makakadash. Double honors and salutations to the elders and apostles of Great Stone Well, to the Akim Akwath, throughout the four corners of the earth, holding on in sincerity and truth, to the gospel of Lord Amashak Yahweh Shai in these days and times, this bit of Nasha, DC Camp. Another short lesson for the hopeful elect. Edification is necessary in these days of great turmoil. Our faith is being tested, so you have to remember that you need to be able to resonate with the truth, with the proper information to guide your faith on the right path. And as you see the chaos around the whole world, specifically the conflict over there in the Middle East, between the United States and Iran, including the state of Israel, you could tell that there's a shift. There's a shift in the mindsets of the people of the earth. They're beginning to see that the power structure of Esau is not reliable, it's not dependable, it's not forthcoming. Therefore, the criticism is going to be very, very, very blunt. It's going to be very, very specific concerning the historical aspects of Esau's rulership, Esau's empire. Yeah, because when you have all these conflicts, it reveals who has the upper hand and who is fighting based on principle. And now, when people decide not to go along with who has the biggest, baddest military and the lean upon principle, that's a problem for Esau, man. And the principles of resistance is being observed by the folks on the earth. That becomes a issue with Esau, man. That's the reason why he has to go with this agenda of censorship. Now a lot of teenagers are catching up with the chaos that's happening upon the earth. They're beginning to stage their own protests. They're beginning to think critically. They're beginning to look up documents and all that stuff. So they're no longer falling for the okie doke. And Esau's upset. So I gotta read this precept. It's gonna be from the book of Ecclesiastes, chapter 8 and 9. It says, all this have I seen, and applied my heart unto every work that is done under the sun. There is a time wherein one man ruleth over another to his own hurt. Yeah, so there's no trust. The folks don't trust the government like they used to, man. They see the problems with the governance. They see the corruption. They see the falsehoods being pushed in the media and all that stuff. They see all the narratives that you know the people are pushing back against. And now they have access to historical records. And what does that do? That becomes a launching pad for a lot of them, man. Because when they start going on all these shows and making all these videos concerning, the path you know, the path of Esau that he has taken towards this modern day chaos. They're in shock at how long, they've that the previous generations have allowed this to happen, and then they see the corruption in their, government structures, man. They see all the lobbyists, they see all the campaign finance, chaos, and they begin to wonder, why does the government is so ineffective when it comes to taking care of the people, but when it comes to war, their efficiency is so second to none. So when you start realizing that the mindset of the people is catching up, you know, with the agenda of the elites, all of a sudden, they start coming up with new terms, branding people as, as folks looking to cause trouble, as troublemakers, man. You know, you start having accounts getting demonetized and, shadow banned and all that stuff, censorship. So you begin to realize that these so-called media giants, they're all in on it. So what do people do? They want to create their own platform. And when people create their own platform, that's a sign that the people at the top have lost the grip on power. So what do you think the people at the top will do? They have to lash out, and that's what you see, man. When the journalists, ask those questions, you see the responses from all these senators and all these civil servants. It doesn't bring any satisfaction to the people because they see the charade, they see the smoke screen, they see all the influence of all these lobbies that is preventing the proper lifestyle. It's a better uh, living conditions, man, for the American people. So that's just another chaos, man. Now there's politicians have to lean on the power of the state, to crush the people, and it's going a certain direction. But then when the pushback begins to happen, they want to come out as pacifiers, to pretend as if they're on the side of the people. But all along, they've been facilitating the crumbling of people's livelihoods, man. So it's just a matter of time that there'll be more chaos on the streets. So when you read the book of Psalm 27 and 12, it says, "Deliver me not over unto the will of mine enemies, for false witnesses are risen up against me, and such as breathe out cruelty." Yeah, so that's one thing, people have to deal with, man, because they now know that when these so-called law enforcement agencies go before the judge to put a warrant, they could always falsify it. And when they falsify it, now you see the results. You know, someone takes out a warrant, you know, against you, but then you have no idea. You don't get no notification, no nothing, nothing. Nothing, no notification, and then you deal with the consequence. So that's just things you have to consider as the empire falls apart, man. Those are the slippery slopes, man. You know, and now when it's time to go to the courthouse and all that stuff, all of a sudden, you know, they want to drag it out. You know, they want to push for more intimidation tactics. Yeah, so that's really what happens. You know, when the power structure, to keep the country afloat is consuming the people, that's what you get. You know, it begins to collapse from the inside. And when there is no trust between the people and the government, it's a wrap. There is no continuance, to the next generation of prosperity, man. It's gonna be a downhill, a downhill operation. So it's basically a self-destruction. So I'll go ahead and play this clip, man, because a lot of people are now cursing out these Amalekites. That they've attached themselves, you know, head and foot to the American governing system.
We're seeing here the decline, the fall and collapse of the American empire. This idea that they're a superpower that can act at will is clearly wrong. It's an absolute strategic disaster for the United States. American policy has always been up for sale over the last couple of decades. And the Israelis understood this. The penetration of the pro-Israel lobby across all aspects of decision-making in Washington, the media space, the political space, is so deep. Now we can speak about the truth, and the truth is out there. Israel has lost the capacity to make sober, rational, strategic decisions. Mossad for years had built major networks and inroads into civil society in Iran. And they were pressing all the buttons, issuing them with communication devices and weapons. They create false flags against an enemy that comes out of nowhere. They're fighting ghosts. It's insurgency at its worst. It's Vietnam times 100. Ultimately, America is far less well off than they are now. This war has been to the detriment of all economies. The burden of that is now being borne by the Europeans. And, you touch their interests, and that's a step too far. Everything the Gulf states have told Trump was going to happen did happen in the end. And it led to this strategic defeat. The Arab street or the Muslim street see the Iranians now as a protector of the Palestinian cause and the only capable obstacle in Israel's way in terms of Israeli expansionism. For the Trump organization, for the Trump family, there are opportunities to make billions of dollars. Moving forward, Israel-US relationship, Trump-Netanyahu relationship in the next coming weeks is going to be extremely interesting to watch.
Yeah, so that's the mess that Esau has created just to be at the top of the food chain. He wants to be at the top of the pyramid, but then he doesn't understand, man. That it's the most size program. You cannot just set yourself up and think you have what it takes to sustain it. So that's the reason why our people need to pay attention to these events. Basically all prophecy. So the book of Proverbs chapter 17 and 11 says, an evil man seeketh only rebellion, therefore a cruel messenger shall be sent against him. Yeah. So this is the faith of of Edom, the faith of Babylon. This is the faith of the so-called Israeli, man. The so-called Amalekite. They're gonna have to deal with the pain and the pain of the Mossad destroying their empire, destroying their power structure. Just like when you have ants, attacking an invader. Yeah, they're gonna have to deal with that, because they're gonna have to fight a war out there over there in the Middle East, but then they're gonna have to deal with the so-called domestic insurrection. People fighting for the little that they have. People fighting for survival here on the streets of America, and it's just part of it, man. And that makes it easier. for the empire, to be eradicated. And that's one thing that Esau has to admit now, that they've messed up. They've messed up, that they cannot fix it. And what they're gonna try to do is controlled demolition. Controlled demolition. That's what they have to lean on. That's exactly what they have to lean on, man. You know, they've caused so much damage. They've created so many enemies. Even in the EU, when the Secretary of War Hegseth went over there, was lecturing them about immigration and comparing it to a military invasion. But then when you realize that the folks that caused the migration crisis are the same people that destroying, Iran, are attacking the so-called Palestinians and Lebanese, they're attacking Lebanon, So it's just those things that people are able to put two and two together. When you look at the migrant crisis, you can always see their fingerprints on it. No matter how much they want to provide aid and all that stuff, whether whether it was through the former USAID, the people don't forget, and then they realize that it wasn't really worth it now, man. So now you have a crisis over there in Europe with these migrants. They'd rather be in their own place, their own country. But then when they go back, they can't even get a good night's rest without, all these bombings and all this chaos going on because of the people at the top that want to have an eternal influence, over their resources. So that's the issue, man. If you cannot live at home at peace, how are you going to live in peace in a foreign land? So that's what these migrants over there in Europe have to explain. They want to go back home, but now see what they have to deal with. See what they got to deal with. So when they destabilize North Africa, they destabilize West Africa, East Africa, the Middle East, South America, you know, those are dominoes, man. You know, those are dominoes. If you don't want the people to have their own spot, why complain? When they need a place of refuge. So it just shows you, man, it's a chaotic environment that Esau has to deal with. And now, when it's time for peace, Esau doesn't want the peace because it's not good for his business structure. He has to cause problems. He has to cause death. That's what the scripture talks about, him, being as death that cannot be satisfied. He wants the people's resources, but then he doesn't want the people to be there to benefit from it. He wants the people to just be laborers, laborers, laborers. Yeah, so that's just a quick synopsis of the chaos people have to deal with, man. Because war is not pretty. War doesn't really bring smiles on people's face the way they like to portray on TV. Those are long lasting memories of destroying people's lives. And that vibration is what, people have to live with for the rest of their lives. So the book of Jeremiah, chapter 50 and 42, it says, They shall hold the bow and the lance. They are cruel. All right. You know what? Let me start from verse 41. Jeremiah 50 and 41. Behold, the people shall come from the north, and the great nation, and many kings shall be raised up from the coasts of the earth. They shall hold the bow and the lance. They are cruel and will not show mercy. Their voice shall roar like the sea, and they shall ride upon horses, every one put in array, like a man to the battle against thee, O daughter of Babylon. Yeah, so it's gonna be painful, man, when you see the coalition of resistance. You know, you say that, oh well, these folks are the axis of evil. But now these folks are tired, they're frustrated. You know, this World Cup has really opened up the eyes of a lot of people that something is going on, and they're not pleased. You know, to to accept it, man. You know, so now they're taking records, man. They're taking accounts of what's really going on. You know, and they see the war, they see the chaos, they see the destruction, they see the false promises. You know, being being torn apart. All right, and it's gonna be painful, man. And then when verse 43 says, "The king of Babylon had heard the report of them, and his hands waxed feeble." All right, the king of Babylon had heard the report of them, and his hands waxed feeble. Anguish took hold of him, and pangs as of a woman in travail. So when you see the president lashing out and getting all stressed out and weary, fatigued, and all that stuff, yeah, it's just the hand of the Lord is coming upon him. You know, it's you know, the hand of the Most High's wrath. You know, it's about to press down heavy upon him. You know, because this is the end. You know, this is the end of the empire that they've been fighting hard to keep for centuries. All right, 250 years. You know, it's not longer what they think it is, man. You know, because the Lord has already, determined how far, let me say, how long their rulership is going to be extending to. So they're basically on borrowed time. And when they're on borrowed time, this is the type of behavior you see. You see the Amalekites crashing out on TV over a so-called deal, with the Iranians. So, yeah, it just proves to you, man, that the chaos about to come, it's about to be second to none, man, So that's the reason why you have to be prayerful that you do not miss this opportunity to learn about these acts in prophecy. And then the book of Ecclesiastes, chapter 9 and 11 says, I returned and saw under the sun that the race is not to the swift, nor the battle to the strong, neither yet bread to the wise, nor riches to men of understanding, nor yet favor to men of skill, but time and chance happeneth to them all. Yeah, so the Messiah is already putting the parameters, into this equation about who's going to be at the top or who's going to be at the bottom and those in between, just like what happened to the Greeks when they came up against the Roman. I mean, actually, when they came up against the Persians, so it's basically the replay. The replay. Yeah. So how are they gonna be able to sustain it when that kingdom, is fractured? So it's just how it is, man. They're getting closer to the end. You know, the Greco-Roman Empire. It's on its last leg, man, and they're not happy. The division between the United States and the EU is becoming extra super clear. Yeah, so that's the reason why they're not pleased with the chaos over there in the Middle East, man, because they don't have all the resources that they want. You know, especially when this chaos is preventing them from progressing economically. You know, so when you cause trouble in the energy markets, in the commercial markets around the world, that means you're holding back the GDP of these member states of NATO. And when the Secretary of War, Hexet, Trump is saying that, okay, well, these folks, you got to increase your contributions, to NATO, your financial obligations to NATO. It doesn't look good. They can't do it. It's not sustainable for them because the economic environment is not suitable. That's going to cause them to have an unbalanced economy. So when the war is going on over there in the Middle East, because when everything is tied up, revenue is stuck. Revenue is stuck. And when revenue is stuck, you cannot turn around and tell them to increase their contributions to NATO. So that's what they've been dealing with. The instability over there in the Middle East, over there in Africa. It's not making their GDP, to get to a certain level of spending that is being proposed to them. So what do? They have to start creating policies to reduce people from qualifying for public assistance, especially these migrants. They rather pay to push the people out and have them return to their land. So they're gonna have to tighten up on their immigration policy, and that's a pattern that's coming up in Europe now, man, because they see it when the flow, when the flow for the economy is not coming true. That means they have to reduce the population. Now, how can they do that? They have to figure out how to adjust their policies to reduce the intake, and those that violate the terms of their status, they gotta go. That's just how it is, man. That's exactly what they're gonna do, and it's gonna create a divide. That's why you have a protest over there in Europe. So that's a lesson so far, man. The empire, is crumbling. You could feel the pain. You could feel the pain. You can see it. You can sense it. Shalom.